Good day everyone, especially to you Dr. Ria Kibir. I am Hannah Breath Alperocha from BSHM3A. So in this video, I'm going to discuss about the chapter 13 that tackles about the labor law. So according to Abraham Maslow, a motivated worker will be a productive worker. So let's go to the learning objectives. The first one is to enumerate the classification of employees, their benefits, privileges, and policies affecting them. Identify some best practices in handling human resources in tourism establishments. Identify the procedures in handling sexual harassment in the workplace, and also explain the rights of workers employed in tourism establishments. So for the topic outline are already shown on the screen. So let's go to the introduction. So the tourism industry thrives on the contributions of a skilled and motivated workforce. Enforcing fair treatment, such as just compensation, a proper working conditions for employees is essential for smooth operation of businesses within this sector. Labor laws serve as a framework that safeguards the rights of workers while also helping employers maintain a productive and legally compliant work environment. So in this chapter, it explores the fundamental provisions of labor laws that impact tourism-related enterprises. It examines the rights and privileges granted to employees, including wages, benefits, and workplace policies, while also highlighting employer responsibilities. And also understanding this legal aspect is crucial for business owners, managers, and employees alike, as they help foster a balanced and sustainable work environment in the tourism industry. So let's go to the constitutional provisions on labor law. So the first one is the full protection to labor in Section 3. The state shall afford full protection to labor, local and overseas, organized and unorganized, and promote full employment and equality of employment opportunities for all. So this means that the government ensures that all workers, whether working in the country or abroad, have legal protection, and it also aims to provide enough jobs and fair opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background. Also, the next one is that it shall guarantee the rights of all workers to self-organization, collective bargaining, and negotiations, and peaceful concerted activities, to including the right to strike in accordance with the law. So they shall be entitled to security of tenure, humane conditions of work, and living wage, and they shall also participate in policy and decision-making processes affecting their rights and benefits as may be provided by law. So this means that workers have the right to form or join labor unions, negotiate with their employers, and protest peacefully if needed. And they also have the right to job security, good working condition, and fair wages, and also say in policies that affect them. And the next one, that the state shall promote the principle of shared responsibility between workers and employers, and the preferential use of voluntary modes in settling disputes, including conciliation, and shall enforce their mutual compliance therewith to foster industrial peace. So this means that the government also encourages the workers and employers to work together and solve problems peacefully through discussion and negotiation rather than legal battles. The next one is that the state shall regulate the regulation between workers and employers, recognizing the right of labor to its share in the fruits of production and the right of enterprises to reasonable returns of investment and to expansion and growth. So this law also ensures that workers receive fair wages from the company's earnings, while also allowing businesses to earn profit and grow. Then let's go to the protection for working women on this section 14. So in this section, the state shall protect working women by providing safe and healthful working conditions, taking into account their maternal function and such facilities and opportunities that will enhance their welfare and enable them to realize their full potential in the service of the nation. So this means that women workers should have a safe and healthy work environment. Special consideration should be given to their needs as mothers, such as maternity leave and other benefits to help them balance work and family life. And the third one is the rule of people's organization on the section 15. The state shall respect the role of independent people's organization to enable the people to pursue and protect within the democratic framework their legitimate and collective interests and aspirations through peaceful and lawful means. So this means that people have the right to form and join organizations that protect their interests as long as these groups follow legal and peaceful means. And the fourth one is the public participation in decision making on the Section 16. So the right of the people and their organizations to effectively and reasonably participate at all levels of social, political, and economic decision making shall not be abridged. So the state shall by law facilitate the establishment of adequate consultation mechanisms. So this means that citizens and the organizations have the right to take part in making decisions that affect society and politics and the economy. The government should provide ways for them to express their opinions and be heard. So these constitutional provisions ensures that workers are treated fairly, business can grow, and society remains peaceful by promoting cooperation, equality, and participation in decision making. So let's go to the classification of employees. So for the classification of employees, employees in a company are categorized based on the nature and duration of their employment. And this classification determines their job security and benefits. So the first one is the regular employees. Regular employees perform essential tasks for the company and have a job security. They cannot be dismissed without just cause. So casual employees who works for a year in the same role and probationary employees who complete their trial record period are also considered regular. Additionally, workers provided by the labor-only contractor are considered regular employees of the principal company. The second classification of employees is the casual employees. So casual employees are hired for work that is incidental to the business and for a specific period. If they work for at least 1 year in the same activity, they become regular employees, thus ensuring job security. And the third one is the seasonal employees. So seasonal employees are hired for work that only occurs at specific times of the year, such as in retail or agriculture, and they are not permanently separated from the company but are laid off during the off-season and re-employed when needed. So the next one is also the project employees. So project employees are hired for specific projects with set durations. Their employment ends once the project is completed. If the company repeatedly hires the same employee for different projects without formal termination, they may be considered regular employees. And the next one is the probationary employees. So probationary employees are on trial for up to 6 months to determine if they meet the company's standards. If they successfully meet these standards, they become regular employees, and their employment can be terminated before the probation period ends for just cause or failure to meet the required standards. So for the probationary employment rules, probationary employment shall be governed by the following rules. So the first one is the learnable or apprenticeable work. So if the work for which the employee has been engaged is learnable or apprenticeable according to the standards set by the Department of Labor and Employment, the probationary period shall be limited to the unauthorized learnership or apprenticeship period. And the second one is the non-learnable or non-apprenticeable work. So if the work is neither learnable or apprenticeable, the probationary period shall not exceed 6 months starting from the date the employee actually began working. And the third one is the termination of the probationary employees. The services of the employee engaged on the probationary basis may be terminated only for a just or authorized cost. So, or when the employee fails to qualify as a regular employee in accordance with reasonable standards set by the employer. It is settled that the probationary employee enjoys only temporary employment status, not permanent status. In general, the employee is terminable at any time before the expiration of the 6 months probationary period. The employment of probationary employee may only be terminated for first one is a just cause, or when the employee fails to qualify as a regular employee based on reasonable standard communicated by the employer at the time of engagement. The employer's power to terminate a probationary employee is subject to the following conditions. It must be exercised in accordance with the specific requirements of the contract. The dissatisfaction on the part of the employer must be real and in good faith, not in prejudicial or in violation of the contract of the law. There must be no unlawful discrimination in the dismissal. So the burden of proving just or valid cause for dismissing an employee rests on the employer. So let's go to the employees for a fixed term. So these are workers with employment contracts that specify a set period of time. A fixed term employment agreement is valid if both the employer and employee willingly and knowingly agree to it without any pressure or coercion. The agreement should also not aim to bypass laws that protect job security. So this means that a contract is legal as long as both parties freely agree to it, and it doesn't unfairly undermine the employee's right to job stability. So for a fixed-term contract to be valid and not violate job security laws, the following must be true. So both the employer and employee willingly agreed to the fixed period without any pressure or force, and the employee's consent must be genuine. So this ensures that employee's agreement is made voluntarily. So the second one, that the employee should not feel forced or manipulated into agreeing to the contract. So let's go to the overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs. So an overseas Filipino worker, also known as a migrant worker, is someone who works or has worked in another country where they are not a legal resident. An OFW is a person who has been promised or assured employment abroad, and if they face harm or injury based on this promise, they may be protected by law. So this refers to Filipino working abroad under the promises of employment with legal protections in the case of issues. So the law governs the employment of OFW is the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipino Act of 1995, the Republic Act of 8042. So the next one is the special workers, and these are the apprentices, learners, and the handicapped workers. So apprentice or an apprentice is a worker who has written apprenticeship agreement with an employer or a recognized entity. Apprentices go through training for a job that requires both practical on-the-job experience and theoretical learning, usually within a set period agreed upon in the apprenticeship contract. So the apprenticeship period cannot be longer than 6 months. So this means that the person is receiving formal training in a specific trade or occupation, helping them learn trade over a fixed time. The second one is the learners. So learners are people hired as trainees in semi-skilled jobs or other industrial occupations that are not formally apprenticeship but can learn through practical on-the-job training within a short time, usually not exceeding 3 months. Learners can be employed when there are no experienced workers available, and their hiring should not be negatively affect labor standards or cause unfair competition by lowering wages. So these are the trainees in jobs that don't require long-term formal training but still need hands-on learning. And the third one is the handicapped workers. So handicapped workers are individuals whose ability to earn is limited due to the physical, mental, or sensory impairments or injuries. Under Republic Act 7277, also known as the Magna Carta for Disabled Persons, disabled workers are entitled to the same terms, conditions, pay, benefits, and also the incentives as other employees without disabilities. So this ensures that the equal treatment and fairness in employment for people with disabilities. So let's go to the benefits, privileges, policies affecting employees. So let's go to the first one is the minimum wage. By virtue of Republic Act number 6727, Wage Rationalization Act, the determination of the minimum wage rates is now responsibility of the Regional Tripartite and Productivity Board. The concept of minimum wage means more than just setting a floor wage to increase existing wages. It aims to improve productivity and ensure a decent standard of living for workers and their families, recognizing labor as primary social and economic force. So this ensures that workers receive a wage that supports their basic needs and encourages economic fairness. The next one is the collective bargaining. This refers to the process of negotiating agreements in good faith regarding wages, working hours, and other employment terms, and entering into written contracts known as collective bargaining agreements or CBAs. So the provision typically include management rights, union recognition, wage and fringe benefits, working conditions, and grievance procedures in the contract's duration. So collective bargaining involves the employer and the employees represented by the labor union. Negotiations are required when certain conditions are met, such as legal duty to initiate contracts negotiation, proof of majority representation, and demand to bargain. So if the conditions are not met or if negotiations fail, it may lead to a strike or lockout. Once a CBA is negotiated, it must be ratified by the majority of all workers in the bargaining unit, not just the union members, but the CBA must be registered with the Bureau of Labor Relations within 30 days, and its provisions are valid for 3 years while the presentation term is 5 years. So this ensures that employees have voice in setting terms of their employment and that fair processes are followed during negotiations. So let's go to the Labor Management Council. So under Article 255 of the Labor Code, individual employees or groups, whether unionized or not, have the right to raise concerns or grievances with their employer at any time, with or without collective bargaining. So the Department of Labor and Employment encourages the creation of Labor Management Council in both unionized and non-unionized workplaces. The Labor Management Council serves as a communication platform where management and employees can discuss issues and resolve disputes without formal collective bargaining. So this ensures open communication between employers and employees, allowing workplace concerns to be addressed fairly. So let's go to the maternity and paternity leaves. So the first one is the maternity leave. Maternity leave benefits are covered under Republic Act number 8282. Under this law, a female worker or married or unmarried who has made at least 3 monthly Social Security system contributions within past 12 months before childbirth or miscarriage is entitled to a daily maternity benefit equal to 100% of her average daily salary credit. This benefit lasts for 60 days for a normal delivery and 78 days for cesarean delivery. So the following condition must be met to avail maternity benefits. So the first one is the employee must notify her employer about her pregnancy and expected due date, and the employer must inform the SSS. The employer must advance the full maternity benefit payment within 30 days of the leave application. And also, maternity benefits cannot be claimed along the sickness benefits for the same period. And the next one is the benefits apply only for the first 4 pregnancies or miscarriages. The SSS will reimburse the employer 100% of the paid maternity benefits upon proof of payment. And also, if the employer fails to remit the required SSS contributions or notify the SSS about the pregnancy, they will be responsible for paying damages equal to the maternity benefits the employee should have received. So this ensures that financial support for working mothers during childbirth or miscarriage, helping them recover without losing income. And the next one is the paternity leave. Republic Act number 8187, Paternity Leave Act of 1996, provides a paternity leave benefits to married male employees in both the private and public sectors. Under this law, a married male employee is entitled to 7 days of fully paid leave for the first 4 childbirth or miscarriages of his legal spouse with whom he lives. To qualify for paternity leave, the employee must be employed at the time of childbirth or miscarriage, be living with his legal spouse when she gives birth or has miscarriage, apply for paternity leave the following implementing rules, having wife who has given birth or suffered a miscarriage, and also following the implementing rules. So this allows fathers to support their spouses during childbirth and early childcare without losing income. So let's go for the parental leave for solo parents. Republic Act number 8972, Solo Parents Welfare Act of 2000, grants additional leave benefits to solo parents. Aside from existing leave privileges, a solo parent who has worked for at least 1 year is entitled to maximum of 7 days of parental leave annually. So this provides extra time off for solo parents to take care of their children and balance work responsibilities. So let's go to the union rights, strikes, and lockouts. A legitimate labor organization is a registered labor union that has the legal authority to represent its members. So this means that it can file cases on behalf of its members for monetary claims related to wages, benefits, or other employment issues. So this ensures that only one official labor union negotiates with the employer on behalf of all employees, preventing conflicts between multiple unions. Also, a strike refers to a temporary stoppage of work by employees acting together due to a labor or industrial dispute. So this means that strikes are initiated by employees to demand better working conditions, wages, or rights, while lockouts are used by employers as a bargaining tool or response to union demands. The next one is the labor dispute. So a labor dispute includes any disagreements over employment terms, working conditions, or employee representation in negotiation. So this means that even issues related to union recognition or employment policies can be considered labor disputes. So let's go to the grounds for strikes and lockouts. So strikes and lockouts are only allowed under two legal grounds. The first one is the collective bargaining deadlock. So this means that this happens when the employer and the union cannot reach an agreement during collective bargaining negotiations. Like for example, if workers demand higher wages and the employer refuses, leading to negotiation statement. And the second one is the unfair labor practice. So this includes violations such as union busting, wrongful dismissal of employee for union activities, or refusal to negotiate in good faith. If an employer discriminates against union members or refuses to recognize the union, this is considered ULP and may justify a strike. So let's go to the legal requirements for strike or lockout. So for a strike to be considered legal and protected under the law, the following steps must be followed. The first one is the notice of strike or lockout, where the union or employee must file a formal notice with the Department of Labor and Employment through the National Conciliation and Mediation Board. So this serves as an official declaration that dispute exists and that party intends to take action. And also it needs the calling off period, where this period gives both parties time to negotiate and find solution before resorting to a strike or lockout. And the third one is the conciliation and mediation. So this ensures that peaceful negotiation take place before extreme measures are taken. And the fourth one is the strike vote, where this ensures that a strike or lockout has proper employee support and is not initiated by just few individuals. And the fifth one is the strike vote report, where this prevents sudden and unauthorized work stoppages, allowing time for final negotiation. And the last one is the government intervention. Where this happens in the industries that affect national security, public safety, or essential services, ensuring that critical operations are not disrupted. So these legal requirements are designed to ensure the strikes and lockouts are a last resort, used only when peaceful negotiations have failed. They also help maintain order in labor relations by preventing sudden or unlawful work stoppages. So let's go to the service charges. The rule on service charges applies only to business that collect them, such as hotels, restaurants, lodging houses, nightclubs, cocktail lounges, massage clinics, bars, casinos, gambling houses, and similar establishments, including private government and government subsidiaries. So this means that not all businesses are required to collect service charges, only those in the hospitality and entertainment industries that impose them. So all service charges collected by these establishments must be distributed as follows. So it shows on the screen. So this ensures that service charges benefit the employees who provide the service while still allowing management some flexibility in handling operational costs and rewarding managers. So let's go to the employment contracts. An employment contract is a formal agreement between an employee and an employer, where the employee commits to providing work or services and the employers agree to pay compensation based on the on-time work or task completed. This contract ensures that both parties understand their responsibilities and rights. And the second paragraph means this means an employment contract cannot contain unfair conditions such as forcing employees to work unpaid overtime or limiting their legal rights. And also, this protects workers from being exploited by vague or misleading contract terms. Legally, an employment contract is consensual, meaning it does not require additional formalities to be valid. However, many industries such as tourism and hospitality use written contracts to clearly define employment terms. So this is especially important for probationary employees and also project-based employees, casual employees, fixed-term employees. So written contracts prevent misunderstandings and protect both employers and employees by clearly outlining expectations, responsibilities, and limitations. So let's go to the common elements in a written employment contract. So to ensure clarity and compliance with company policies, employment contracts often include company rules and regulations, code of discipline, mission orders, security, safety, accounting, and auditing policies, day-to-day instructions, job descriptions, standard operating procedures, and also memoranda from superiors. So having these documents in place helps employees understand their rules, follow lawful and reasonable orders, and contribute to a productive workplace. So let's go to the death benefits. Under the Social Security law, when a member who has paid at least 36 months contributions before the semester of death passes away, their primary beneficiaries such as a spouse or dependent children will receive a monthly pension. If there are no primary beneficiaries, the secondary beneficiaries such as parents or siblings will receive a lump sum payment equivalent to 36 times the monthly pension. If the deceased had paid less than 36 contributions, both primary and secondary beneficiaries will receive a lump sum equal to either the monthly pension multiplied by the total number of contributions paid OR and 12 times the monthly pension, whichever is higher. So this financial support helps ease the burden of funeral costs for the family. So for the related death, so beneficiaries will receive extra death benefits from the employee's compensation and state insurance fund in addition to SSS benefits. So under this fund, the deceased monthly benefit will be paid out plus an additional 10% for dependent child up to maximum of five children. So the next one is the health benefits. So health benefits cover sickness, medical, and hospitalization costs. Under the Social Security law, under the Social Security law, a member who has paid at least 3 monthly contributions in the 12-month period before a semester of their illness or injury and who is confined for more than 3 days, either hospital or at home with SSS approval, will receive daily sickness benefit equal to 90% for their average daily salary. So this ensures that workers who fall ill due to their jobs receive proper medical care and financial support during their recovery. And the next one is also the drug testing, where Republic Act number 9165, Comprehensive Dangerous Drug Act of 2002, requires that drug testing must be conducted only in environment forensic laboratories of DOH accredited drug testing centers to ensure accurate and reliable results. Drug testing certificate issued by these accredited centers is valid for 1 year and may be used for various official purposes. So this policy ensures that drug-free workplace and protects the health and safety employees and customers. And the next one is the retirement. Under Article 287 of the Labor Code, as amended by Republic Act number 7641, the new retirement law, an employee may retire at the age specified in their collective bargaining agreement or employment contract. If no retirement plan is in place, then an employee may voluntarily retire at 60 years old or older but must retire at 65 years old. To qualify for retirement benefits, the employee must have served at least 5 years in the company. So upon retirement, the employee is entitled to a retirement pay equal to at least 1/2 month's salary for every year of service. Any service of 6 months or more in a year is counted as a full year. This law ensures that employees receive financial security after years of service. And also, we have the uniform policies where some tourism-related businesses such as restaurant, hotels, department stores, gasoline station, rest areas, motels, resorts, etc. require employees to be well-groomed and wear clean, smart uniform. So this standard ensures professionalism, improves customer perception, and maintains hygiene and orderliness in establishments that cater to tourists. So let's go to the SSS, PhilHealth, and also the Pag-ibig, and also the Employees Compensation Commission, and then the Pag-ibig. So the first one is the SSS, or the Social Security System. So the Social Security System covers private sector employees and provides financial security against various risks that can cause loss of income or create financial burden for workers and their families. So these risks include disability, sickness, maternity, old age or retirement, death, and other contingencies, assistance in cases of unemployment and work-related accidents. So SSS operates as a tax-exempt social security system designed to provide meaningful financial protection to members and their dependents. And the second one is the PhilHealth, or the Philippine Health Insurance Corporation. PhilHealth is a government agency responsible for administering health insurance benefits for both private and public sector employees. It took over Medicare program from the SSS in April 1998, along with the 14 billion in health insurance funds contributed by employers and employees. So the PhilHealth benefit packages covers inpatient hospital care, where there's a room and board services, healthcare professionals, diagnostic tests, and other laboratory exams, and use of medical and surgical equipment and facilities, prescription medicines and biologicals, and also health education while being admitted in the hospital. And for the outpatient care for non-hospitalized patients, they have the doctor in consultation, laboratory and diagnostic services, preventive health care, prescription medicines and biologicals, and also emergency care and transfer services for patients in critical conditions. So this PhilHealth ensures that employees receive affordable healthcare services and financial support in case of illness and medical emergencies. So let's go also to the next one, the Employees Compensation Commission, or the ECC and State Insurance Fund. So the ECC provides the additional financial protection for employees in case of work-related disabilities, illnesses, or deaths. If an employee suffers from work-related injury or disease, they are entitled to receive benefits from the State Insurance Fund, which include medical services, income benefits, death benefits, and also funeral benefits. So this ensures that employees who suffer from work-related accidents or illnesses receive proper financial and medical support. And the last one is the Pag-ibig funds, or the Home Development Mutual Fund, or HDMF. So under Republic Act number 7742, Pag-ibig Fund membership is mandatory for all employees covered by SSS. So this requirement also applies to foreign employees working in the Philippines unless specifically exempted. So the Pag-ibig Fund provides financial assistance through housing loans, calamity loans, provident saving programs. So this Pag-ibig helps employees secure housing, emergency funds, and long-term savings for their future financial stability. So let's go to the laws against discrimination in employment. So the Labor Code of the Philippines guarantees equal work opportunities for all, regardless of sex or race or creed. The government enforces various laws to protect workers from discrimination in hiring, promotion, wages, and working conditions. So the first one is the Magna Carta for Disabled Person, or the Republic Act number 7277. So this law prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities in employment and ensures have equal work opportunities. So the following actions are considered discriminatory. So the first one is the unfair classification, unjust testing requirement, discriminatory employment standards, lower compensation, unfair promotion policies, inappropriate job assignments, unjust termination, faulty employment tests, and also exclusion from labor unions. So employers must provide reasonable accommodation to disabled workers before considering termination. And the next law is the Strengthening the Prohibition on Discrimination Against Women, Republic Act number 6725. So this law protects women from discrimination in employment and ensures equal pay and career opportunities. So the following are acts of gender discrimination, and these are the unequal pay, gender-based promotion bias. So this law reinforces gender equality in the workplace. ensuring that women receive equal pay and opportunities. And the third one is the Presidential Decree number 966, International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So this law makes racial discrimination a criminal offense. It applies to hiring, compensation, promotion, and working conditions, ensuring that workers are not treated unfairly based on race, ethnicity, and nationality. Employers who violate this law face criminal liability and penalties. So let's go to the employment of women, the workplace protection. So the Philippine government also enforces policies to protect working women by ensuring safe and healthy working conditions, fair treatment in employment policies, maternity leave, and other benefits. So this law ensures that a fair and inclusive and non-discriminatory work environment for all employees. So let's go to the employment protection and rights for women in the workplace. So the Labor Code of the Philippines enforces policies that protect women's rights in the workplace, ensuring safe working conditions, equal opportunities, and protection from unfair treatment based on gender, pregnancy, or marital status. So these laws aim to create a professional environment where women can work without discrimination or harassment. So employers are required to provide women with a safe and comfortable working environment. Facilities such as separate toilets, lavatories, dressing rooms, and nursery areas must be available in workplaces employing a significant number of women. It is illegal for an employer to require a woman to remain unmarried as a condition for hiring or continued employment, dismiss a woman because of marriage or pregnancy, refuse to reinstate a woman after maternity leave due to the possibility of future pregnancies, transfer or reassign a woman to a job she cannot perform due to a pregnancy. So women working in bars, lounges, nightclubs, and similar establishments are considered formal employees under the law, ensuring they receive labor rights and protections, including fair wages and benefits. And let's go to the sexual harassment in the workplace. Under Republic Act No. 7877 or the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, a sexual harassment is strictly prohibited. This law protects employees from inappropriate behavior in the workplace and holds those in position of power accountable for their actions. So sexual harassment includes making sexual advances, creating intimidating, hostile or offensive work environment, and also threatening or taking action against employees who reject sexual advances. So employers have a legal responsibility to prevent sexual harassment by implementing workplace policies, setting up reporting mechanism, and also enforcing penalties for offenders. So some examples of workplace harassment are unwanted physical contact, superiors making sexual suggestive remarks, jokes, or gestures, requiring female employees to wear revealing clothes, offering pornographic, and also exposure of genitals or obscene behavior by superiors. So employers who fail to implement these anti-harassment measures or allows a culture of harassment to persist face serious legal consequences. So this labor protection ensure that women are treated with, not just women, but also men, are treated with dignity and respected in the workplace while promoting a professional and fair work environment. So the best labor practices in tourism establishments. Labor practices play a crucial role in the success of tourism establishments, including those in lodging, travel agencies, transportation, food services, and tourist sites. When best labor practices are implemented, it enhances employee welfare and contributes significantly to the growth of the company. So this approach has been shown to foster clear communication between management and employees, ensuring shared responsibility for the growth of success of the company. So here are the key labor practices in tourism establishment. The first one is the comprehensive background check, where before hiring new employees, tourism establishment usually conduct a thorough background check. This step ensures that the company recruits individuals who are good fit for the role and also for the organization, contributing to a safer and more reliable workforce. The second one is the orientation and immersion training. The third one, the open dialogue. The open dialogue with the management, wherein some tourism establishment unions may not be presented. Instead, regular dialogues are held between employees and management, such as weekly meetings with the general manager or labor management councils. And the fourth one is the performance evaluation and counseling, the merit-based rewards and benefits, and also due process in termination, where strict adherence to due process is followed in termination disputes. And also we have the code of ethics and company policies, investment in training and development, franchising, and contractual employment, and lastly the compliance with civil service rules in government managed tourist sites. So by adapting these best labor practices, tourism establishments ensure a healthy and productive work environment that benefits both employees and employers. These practices, which emphasize clear communication, fair treatment, employee development, and compliance with legal standards, help foster loyalty, increase employee satisfaction, and ultimately drive the growth of the business. They demonstrate a commitment to employee welfare and provide a competitive edge in the highly dynamic tourism industry. So let's go to the conclusion. So for the conclusion, for labor laws are crucial to the success and sustainability of the tourism industry, as they ensure that employees receive fair treatment, appropriate compensation, and safe working conditions. So these laws establish the rights and privileges of workers, including wages, benefits, and workplace policies, while also outlining the responsibilities of employers to maintain a compliant and productive work environment. By adhering to these legal provisions, employers can foster a culture of fairness and respect, which in turn leads to increased employee motivation and satisfaction. So understanding and applying these labor laws is essential for business owners, managing, and employees alike, as it promotes a balanced and harmonious work environment that supports the long-term growth and prosperity of the tourism sector. So that's all for the chapter 13 that tackles about the labor law. Thank you for listening, and again, I'm Hannah Brett Alperacho from BSHM 3A. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.